Hi, everyone. Hello, hello. Welcome to SNS AuthorFest. We are so excited to be joined here tonight by Kaliane Bradley and Rachel Khong, authors of The Ministry of Time and Real Americans. My name is Meredith Villarello. I'm the associate publisher at Avid Reader Press, the happy publishers of The Ministry of Time. I wanted to kick things off tonight by just thanking all of you for being here, for joining us tonight. We know it's officially summer. It's probably, hopefully, nice out where you are. And we're just grateful for you all taking the time to be at home on your computers, tuning in with us. And I think eventually, hopefully, over 700 other readers. I know everyone's trickling in right now. Welcome. We are especially grateful to Kaliane and Rachel, who are coming to us live from respectively London and Los Angeles. And to our over 35 independent bookstore partners who have helped us to promote and share this event with all of you readers. I'm going to be popping off in just a minute, and I'll be back at the end of the conversation for audience Q&A. So put your questions in the chat, and we will get back to as many of them as we can. Also say hi, introduce yourself, where you're from, what bookstore you shop at. It's always great to get you guys chatting. So to our authors, Kaliane Bradley is a British Cambodian writer and editor based in London. Her short fiction has appeared in Some Such Stories, The Willow Herb Review, Electric Literature, Catapult, and Extra Teeth, among others. She was the winner of the 2022 Harper's Bazaar Short Story Prize and the 2022 V.S. Pritchett Short Story Prize. The Ministry of Time is her debut novel. It was a New York Times bestseller, the May Good Morning America Book Club pick, and an Indie Next List pick for May, a time travel romance, a spy thriller, a workplace comedy, and an exploration of the nature of power and the potential for love to change it all. The Ministry of Time has been praised by the Washington Post as utterly winning and by Emily Henry as electric, charming, whimsical, and strange. Rachel Khong is the author of Goodbye Vitamin, which was the winner of the California Book Award for First Fiction and named a Best Book of the Year by NPR, the Oprah Magazine, Vogue, and Esquire. Her work has appeared in the New York Times Book Review, The Cut, The Guardian, The Paris Review, and Tin House. In 2018, she founded The Ruby, a work and event space for women and non-binary writers in San Francisco's Mission District. She lives in California. Her second novel, Real Americans, was a New York Times bestseller, the May Read with Jenna book club pick, and also an Indie Next List pick for May. Hailed as gorgeous, heartfelt, soaring, philosophical, and deft by Andrew Sean Greer and mesmerizing by Britt Bennett, Real Americans is an exhilarating novel of American identity that spans 3 generations in one family and asks, what makes us who we are, and how inevitable are our futures? So with that, thank you again for coming. And I will turn it over to Kaliane and Rachel.
Hello.
Hi.
How very exciting to be here. I really enjoy listening to those introductions because I always think, God, did we do all that?
I know.
Did we
It feels
like those books?
impossible. It feels impossible. I'm so happy to be here. I loved reading your book, and it felt like we already knew each other because I was traveling around for book tour and just seeing your book also at every airport, you know what I mean? And
I
yeah,
had the same experience. I also had the British proof copy, the British Art of Goodbye Vitamin. That was my my reading copy of Goodbye Vitamin. I've been carrying it around from all the different. I'm currently in a new house, but I've been moving around for
oh my
London
God.
for years and years and years. I've just been carrying it around with me. It's one of my all-time favorite books. So I'm so
Oh, thank you so
thrilled to
much.
be here. Um, I wanted to ask you a question about Real Americans, specifically the title, Real Americans, which is like it's so thrillingly provocative. Like immediately, I felt like I was getting into something exciting. What is a real American? Is there a real America? How do your characters relate to
Yeah.
America, real America?
I think it is provocative and in a way that kind of scared me. Definitely at first when, so this book for a long time was called New Thing, December 2016. And I just had that title for years and years. And Real Americans sort of came when a character in the novel says it to a character in the book who is Chinese American and hasn't really felt, as though she belonged. And I think the phrase is meant to be, I don't know, it's meant to sort of mean a lot of different things, right? I think it sort of conjures a lot, and probably to each specific person, it means something different. But the book is very much about just like stories, the stories that America likes to tell about itself. I mean, not just America, there's so many overlaps, I think, in your book too, with just like, like colonial powers, right? And imperialism, it's the stories that these nations like to tell about themselves and tell their inhabitants, really. And they're stories that we then sort of adopt as people in order to belong somewhere.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, with your book, I mean, I was so excited for this conversation because I could feel as I was reading it that we were both sort of like steeped in the same stuff. And I have this, I mean, it's kind of mystical, and I'm embarrassed to be confessing my mysticism to, these 100 people here right now. But I do sort of believe that ideas are just kind of out there and they're floating around, and then the authors have to like catch them and put them into a book in whatever way is specific to them. And I remember, yeah, I saw your book title and I thought, oh my gosh, The Ministry of Time. My book is also about time, and it starts with time on maybe the third page. And years ago now, like so many years ago, I haven't told anybody this. That phrase like flitted into my mind. Like the Ministry of Time flitted into my mind, and I was like, is my book about time? Like, how is it about time? I don't know what it means. And it was sort of about conspiracies, about powerful people and less powerful people. And so that phrase came into my mind. And then it kind of fell away. I didn't really pursue it. But yeah, I feel like there's so many overlapping themes here, and there's so many things that we were both thinking about. And of course, it manifests in different ways because everyone is just a different human and a different writer. But I'm wondering where this story started for you. And yeah, was it with the time? Was it with, I don't know. Yeah. Well, where did it start?
Firstly, I love the idea that ideas are just floating around. I believe you. Look, I'm very mystic too. I'm so mystic that I'm wearing lucky jade because
Yay.
I
I mean, I
really
have, yeah.
yeah. Um, it's important. It's important. It's making a difference. I can't tell how, it just is.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Ideas are floating around in the same way that, love is universal, but a personal experience of love is unique to the person in love. I think we can definitely we're taking the ideas out of the air and then
Mhm.
giving it their own shape. Embarrassingly, I actually started with the dead guy, who you can see over my shoulder. There he is.
Oh my
There's
gosh, it's framed.
That's
Wow.
great. Totally normal thing to have in my room, looming over me at all times. So it actually started with Graham Gore and getting obsessed with British polar exploration. Unfortunately, once you get obsessed with British polar exploration, you have to think, what were the British doing in
Hmm.
Inuit territories? Nothing good. Why
Hmm.
were they there? Not for good reasons. It's a colonial project. If you are interested in this time in history, and if you're interested in these people from history, you have to kind of face up to the legacy of that of the colonial project, of the imperial project, and also you have to face up to the fact that there is a continuous narrative stretching from then to now to the UK I live in, the London I live in. But I was so fascinated with him that I did drag him into the 21st century. And it was that, like the act of dragging actually, that made me start thinking about time. Because what I was interested in for time for me was this idea of time, but like narrative, history as a narrative, just like exactly as you're saying, the idea that we tell ourselves certain stories about what it means to belong, that we can react to like older cultural touchstones to tell ourselves, well, that's where we came from, so this is who we are now, and this makes continuous sense, as if a person is someone who makes constant continuous sense, as if a country is something that makes constant continuous sense. And it's so interesting actually in your novel, just even the idea of a constant impartial narrative is impossible, because all these three characters have very different
Hmm.
views on what happened and very different memories, and all these characters contradict each other. I found that so fascinating, the idea that they are each recounting their own narrative, and each narrative is completely true for them, but it is just like a form of narrative. History is that form of narrative. The other
Yeah.
thing I was very interested in was, fiction as an idea of handling time. And actually, I wanted to ask you a question about time in your novel. I don't want to give too much away, but some of the characters in it experience time in a different way
Mhm.
to the people around them. And I wondered why that was so important to have.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to respond to in what you just said, and I'm trying to think of what to even talk about first. I mean, I think, yeah, everything that you said about narrative and just the fact that we're creating, like, history is narratives essentially, right? It's not an actual account of what happened, or even what happened between people. It's just a story that people tell. And so,
Mm.
with that phrase, real Americans too, it's America didn't start with the Mayflower, right? People existed here already, and
Yeah.
it was their land. And the story that America likes to tell is that, no, we began here, and this is what it means to be American. And I was so interested in that, but also, um, yeah, the ways in which we then tell stories about our individual lives and try to make them fit into these molds. Um, and so the time thing is funny because that's one of those, it was a little mystical to me where I started writing Lily's section of the book, like part one, the very first, like after the prologue, there's Lily begins the narrative, and she yeah, those very first pages that I wrote, she wakes up. You're always told not to begin a story with a character waking up. And I thought, challenge accepted. I'm just gonna do it. So she's waking up, but there's something weird about how she wakes up, right? She looks at the clock and it doesn't seem as though the clock is moving. It seems like time is stuck. And I wrote that scene and I didn't know why it was happening. I just knew that it was happening, and I kept writing the book. I'm curious about, we can get to this, but I'm curious about what kind of a writer you are, if you have the things planned out in the beginning, or if you're sort of figuring it out in the process. Because for me, it was very much figuring it out and not knowing why I had done anything at all. So with the time blips, each character in this novel, there's three main characters. They each experience these strange sort of time sensations where time seems to sort of expand or something or get stuck. And I just didn't know why it was. But I think it had to do with my own feelings about time scarcity and sort of
Mm.
and that to me was this very American narrative. This book, my book, grapples with a lot of things that we are told as Americans and things that I was raised with as an American child, immigrant American child. It was things like, oh, it's just American individualism, or exceptionalism, or the belief that, if you work really hard, you can get to whatever,
Mm.
achievement that you want. And I think time um, is viewed so I don't know, just like it's treated like currency, right? In I think Western
Yeah.
places, it's
You've got to use it. You've got to spend
yeah,
it properly.
yeah,
You can't
exactly.
waste it. It is a resource
Exactly.
that you're supposed to be using
Yes, it's a
properly.
resource because we're so resource oriented, right? And we're all about like extracting the most that we can out of time. And so I think I felt that not only as an American, but also as an immigrant, right? Because the immigrant narrative sort of like maps on really like conveniently onto the American one, where it's like, okay, if you just work really hard.
Mm.
And now I'm thinking of your character, right? In the novel, she has this sort of sense that she just needs to, be this cog in this government
Just,
machine.
yeah, get into the
Yeah,
machine, work, grind, do the hustle,
exactly.
and you
Yeah,
will somehow succeed. There's some kind of like metabolic process that happens, somehow involving time and work and effort. There is an algorithm, and then we come out the other end and we're
yeah.
successful.
Exactly. And you feel as though, I mean, again, now I'm just going off in all these directions, but you feel as an immigrant, I saw this in both of our books. She feels as though that's her responsibility, right? Because her parents had a more difficult life. Her mother especially had this very difficult life. So yeah, it's almost her responsibility. So I think I was thinking about that, time as this resource that I had felt for all my life. It was something to be used and something to be used wisely. You
Mm.
feel, even as a writer, you feel this pressure to publish like as soon as you can, even before you're ready to, right? And I think I felt that, but I also felt this shift in the way that I wanted to view time. I didn't really want to think of it that way anymore. I didn't want to
Mm.
think of it as something to just constantly be um, worried it was running out, you know, and instead value the things that aren't actually valued in capitalism, right? Like spending time with my family, or just daydreaming, or even like I more and more I think that the act of writing itself is this like, even though like literally like our books are in capitalism right now and they're being sold, the act of writing, right, like the dailiness of writing, the sort of like effort of writing is so inefficient, and it's so,
You don't know if any of it's going to work. You
yes,
write 2,000 words,
exactly.
you look at it and think, oh God, ugh.
Yeah, it just like makes no sense that like people would do this to make a living, right? Because it's
Yeah.
really inefficient. It's really not necessarily a good use of time, right?
Mhm.
And I think that's something that I came to, like, you know, just in the last few years, is feeling like, oh yeah, like I don't want to just be using time and like to get to the end of my life and feel it, I have used it well. You know what I mean? Like I feel
Yeah,
like there's
yeah,
a,
because you're only going to experience your life once, right?
yeah,
You want to actually experience it rather than think about it past out.
yeah,
Actually, I really like. I
yeah.
wanted to ask you about technology as well. I will come back to that, but because
Wait,
there
but
is.
I also want to ask you something too.
Okay.
Wait. So you pause on the technology because I want to relate it to that. Related to that, I feel like um, I felt while reading this book, and this is related to time, that we were both writing books very much from our 30s. Um, I think I'm a few years older than you, but there was this feeling that I had when I got to sort of like my like middle 30s, when I thought, oh no, like time is moving forward and it's not moving backward. You know what I mean?
Mm.
Like you say it in your book, I think a couple times, there are these doors closing behind you, right? You're sort of moving forward in time and you can't actually go backward except for yeah, I mean, you can't actually go backward. And there's this feeling that there's just this like irrevocability to time passing. And I wondered if you could talk about that. Like, does this feel like a 30s book for you? And how you feel about just yeah, was that something that you were thinking about as you were writing?
So when I started writing this, I just entered my 30s. And it was very much a book. The book is told from the point of view of a narrator who no longer thinks of herself as young, though of course she is young. She's 30, 31. But is also, she feels like she's plateaued. So when she's taking this job at this new ministry, which is offering her so much more money, and therefore she thinks more security, she can become the person who is she's supposed to be, that her mother wants her to be, to gain greater safety, greater control within the power structures. That's who she wants to be. It is also a matter of thinking, well, I can't move backwards and I can't
Hmm.
regain the things I've lost. I have to keep moving forwards. It's the same for these characters that are known as the expats. So these are people who are pulled from history at the points of their deaths, so we don't disrupt history, into the present day 21st century Britain. No one in this book ever returns to the past. You can never actually travel back through time to return to your history, rework it, redo it, um, as some of these characters discover. And all of them are thinking, I've lived a life and then I've lost it. I've lived a life and then it's passed me by. If I failed to have loved someone enough, been forgiven enough, um, done the right thing, made the right choices, those doors are shut behind me now. And I have no way of returning to those and resetting my choices. The only thing I can change is the future. That's the only form of time travel that is actually possible. And yeah, that really was haunting me at the time, because the other thing is this is a lockdown novel. So I had, as we all did, a very unpleasant lockdown. I'm going to go for some classic understatement. It was not a good time. I do not want to do it again. But a series of quite unpleasant things happened to me during lockdown, and I realized that lots of these doors of possibility had closed. The only way I could move was forward. Um, and what would that mean for me? What was the future going to look like if I believed in this idea of a consistent narrative of myself, which had just been torn apart by the lockdown? It's interesting actually that you said that Lily was the first character that you started writing, because when I got to, obviously after the prologue you get to her, and I felt like I recognize this woman. She and I are very similar ages. I recognize the things that she's feeling about her experience in the big city as someone who does not have a great deal of money, but wants to like make something of herself and has this complicated relationship with her mother. And what I loved about this playfulness with narrative that you have, and the unreliability of personal narrative, is that I thought I knew the book I was in, and then I did not. Then it changed, and it was so exciting. And so I'm going to use this moment to talk about technology, actually, because I loved the fact that part of this book is about technology and the ways that the word I kept coming to was empower, but I don't actually believe that's true. It gives us power to manipulate, but it doesn't actually tell us more about ourselves. And there is this, would you describe a time blips as magic or fantasy?
I do. Yeah. I that is a mild spoiler, but I think we were permitted to go
Sorry,
there.
everyone.
No. I just answered it. Yeah. I do.
And I like the idea that there's this technological part
yes.
that everyone's grappling with, and what it means for themselves and what they can manipulate. And then there's this mystical part that actually cannot be explained and cannot be
Yeah.
answered, and is
Yeah.
still very mysterious. And how was it balancing those two things?
Yeah. I love that you bring that up. And when you talk about, thinking that you know what book you're reading, and then it's something else entirely. I mean, I think that's something that's so true of your book too, right? Like it's playing with a lot of different um conventions maybe, right? Or just novels that we think that we know, and then sort of twisting it, right? The time travel narrative.
Where you feel seduced by what you think you know of the tropes, and then
Yes. And that's exactly what I was thinking actually with Lily's section. I thought I do sort of want to seduce the reader into a story that feels familiar a little bit, and that I actually feel susceptible to as a person who is like steeped in, fairy tale romances as a young child. But yeah, the technology, I hadn't really thought about it until after the whole book was done, that technology is so much a part of it. There's a sort of television in one of the very first scenes, and then you know when Lily becomes a mother, she bans her son from using the internet, computers. She doesn't want him to be to have his mind rotted by the internet, I think for good reason, but it spectacularly backfires as parental
too much
advisement.
intervention.
Exactly.
Not
Yeah.
to do any more spoilers, but
Yeah. And I think that it's so interesting that you say, I've been thinking a version of this, like data about ourselves is not the same as knowledge about ourselves. And I've been thinking about the fact that I never consented to any of this technology. Um, I I know that it shapes me. This book is very much about how we become who we become, and how we are shaped by our environment, our parents, our genomes, but so many things, right? More things than we can really understand. But I think technology is such a huge one, and we can see it right now sort of playing out in our actual lives, right? Our attention spans. I mean, we're being changed by this technology. And I never said, hey, that's fine with me. Go ahead, take all my data. Like I never really consented to that. And I think I always feel this hesitation about writing technology into novels because um, I don't understand it. And I also don't, I have this, I wonder how it will feel sort of in the future. I mean, that's related to something I want to ask you later too. But the science and the magic, I think I love playing with, just expectation, right? And the sort of expectation that a reader brings to a book. And I think I like playing with expectation because we have been so programmed in certain ways to we've been programmed by the stories themselves, right? The stories most stories tell us how to read them, right? There's already a template sort of for what they are. And so I think I think I'm at this point where it's like, okay, I've heard these stories, but I want a different one, and I want to see what happens when you sort of mess around with that. But yeah, I mean, related to technology, I want to ask you about, this is a book about time travel. I thought about this slightly also when you showed the portrait in the back. Did you think about, there's so many things that the expats are accustomed to, or that they say, that's already outdated. It's very outdated and it's not acceptable, right? Like our narrator has to instruct Graham in,
Not to say slurs.
not saying, yeah, exactly, not saying racial slurs. And yeah, and the language of the book itself does feel very contemporary, right? It's like about a lot of the things that we're talking about right now. It's about conversations that we're having. And so how much did you think about like readers of the future, like making this book possibly accessible to readers of the future? Like, did you think about did you think about that as you were writing? And as a slight bonus question, do you ever imagine that Graham might time travel actually and read your book? Yeah.
Well, that last one, I really hope that man does not time travel and read this book. I have a feeling, having fictionalized him to such an extent that he's probably unrecognizable to himself, I think he'd be quite annoyed with me. I also have a really bad feeling he'd turn up and maybe be a bit of a twat, and then that would just destroy all my dreams. It would be so painful. That's such an interesting question about readers of the future, actually, and also just the way that we envisage our works being received. Because I love what you were saying about playing with expectation, because I think that requires so much confidence in and trust in your reader, actually. Trust that they will play the game with you, and trust that they will come with you in this way, that you come with you along the path of manipulating these stories in this way, because stories only work if there is a teller and a listener. It's a joint creative project, which is such a nice thing. I think I wasn't so much concerned about readers of the future. In fact, I wasn't really thinking about readers of the present. I really felt like, and maybe this is just like first novelitis. I don't know whether you had this with Goodbye Vitamin, but the idea that my work would ever be read by more than like the 15 people it was written for is so wild to me, and still quite alarming. Like, I understand that we've got a lot of people listening to us, and I'm really glad I can only see you. Because it's such a strange feeling to imagine that a story is going to be received and reimagined and remanipulated. The way that time and narrative is used by us is going to be remanipulated and changed. We can't control that. I was thinking about what you were saying about technology giving us data, but not actually telling us more about ourselves. And I think, like, I was thinking especially about the again, I hope this isn't too much of a spoiler, but one of the characters does one of those swab tests to check their ancestry, and I remember thinking, oh my God, it's terrifying, because that data farm out there now has all this information about that character, and this character has received all this information without any necessary new knowledge until the narrative takes over. So the data came, but the narrative had to take over. And a lot of the experiments run by the ministry in the Ministry of Time are like data gathering exercises. Basically, the expats are monitored constantly. They have to prove they're using the right language, to prove they're adapting. They have to have their vitals monitored, to make sure that their bodies are physiologically reacting to the 21st century in the right way. No one really knows what time travel does, like what will it do to space-time? So they have to be checked on constantly, all the time, to make sure they are adapting. But that is also asking the question of, how do you become a good British citizen in this case? How do you prove you are assimilated into a society? To coin a phrase, how do you prove you're a real British person, a real Briton? I think that really flustered me when I realized there were so many parallels between this playful game of time travel and the actual immigrant experience. Because the immigrant experience is also one of leaving behind the past and giving up an earlier narrative and an earlier world that you can never return to. So May, for example, can never return to the China of her past, because it just no longer exists. Not even because she's no longer there, but that version of the world no longer exists. Was she difficult to write? Because she has such an extraordinary perspective. Because she's basically crossing. She's crossing time. She is a time traveler. She's coming through space and time.
Yeah, I mean, as you're talking, I have been thinking about just how all yeah, like the people who make that journey, right? They are time travelers. They
Mm.
really, um, it's kind of, you just can't even comprehend how much life they have lived in comparison to like someone like me whose life is like comparably very like just tame, right? And uneventful. I think May was I wrote her last, I wrote all the characters in the order that they appear, in part because I think I was sort of entering perspectives that were a little bit farther and farther away from me, with Nick, who's the second character in the book. He's a young man, but he's lived through the same years that I have, and with May, it was just this totally different, like set of decades that she had lived
Mm.
through an entirely different life. And um, it was a life that I didn't necessarily know how to immediately access, but it was through a lot of reading, through a lot of watching of oral histories, and just really like living inside of her, not to make it sounds a little creepy, but
No, but I felt that because
yeah,
like it's what she experienced, she's experiencing history, quote unquote history, and she is living in
exactly.
historical events that we have vague sense of. But
Yeah,
what she's actually experiencing are very like small, physical, personal things. Like
exactly.
I'm
And I
thinking
think that's
about.
always true, right? Of like
Mm.
huge historical events. I mean, May experiences them much more immediately than, say Lily experiences 9/11,
Mm.
or Nick experiences the pandemic. I mean, that's a different, actually, the pandemic is an entirely different thing, but um,
Terrible thing.
yeah, but there's still the daily stuff of being a human being, and a human being who has thoughts that sometimes contradict each other and feelings that sometimes contradict each other. Like I was so interested in your book, you almost have this disclaimer where she is wondering, okay, how to not to spoil it, but she is wondering about Graham after a lot of stuff has happened, right? Like she is wondering about the details of her interpersonal relationship, when there is like history altering stuff happening. That's what she's thinking about. And I think that's true for um I don't know, it's like really like unless you're like really in the eye of, or not the eye, I mean you're in the storm, then it's you still have to like go through that daily stuff of being human.
Well,
And
actually, I was thinking both
yeah.
um, the narrator in the Ministry of Time and May in her segment, one of the things they experience extremely personally is falling in love, which is
Hmm.
like that it's like again huge universal thing, but their personal experience of it almost. I think May does actually say something like she experiences love, and while terrible things are happening, it's like that she's only experiencing one very intently, and the
Yeah.
actual Cultural Revolution she's experiencing it almost at a distance.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and I think it's so interesting to think of these books in conversation, and just and these sort of three things, right? Like the past, the present, the future, and how I think for the character of May, she is um hesitant to think about the past. She is someone who is oriented toward the future, and because the past is not something she necessarily wants to dwell on, right? Like it's not something that, yeah, she thinks of fondly, right? She just wants to sort of escape from that. And I think that, like I was saying earlier, the immigrant narrative does map on so well to this dream of like, oh yeah, okay, so we can just, um, we can really change our lives. We can change the world if we just orient toward the future. Um, but I think that can be really harmful too. I mean, not that it's like I absolutely believe in what you sort of come to at the end of your book, which is like the future is what we can change. Like we are
Yeah.
changing things in the present. That's what we can change. We can't actually like go back and undo climate change or whatever. Um, but I think that orientation toward the future, and also I think what our books are in conversation about, is this like certainty in just the certainty about like the projects that these different
Mm.
characters in the books are doing, right? So there's the project of time travel, the project of gene editing, but also just like the project of colonialism, right? The project of
Like colonizing the body, getting into the body and saying, you know, I'm
exactly.
planting the
Yes,
flags of what I want.
exactly. Yeah. And I think that that's, you know, both books are about these national identities that are very much based on, or just like founded in, honestly, like founded in like rightness and certainty and like the belief that yeah, just this confidence, this incredible confidence, honestly. And I think, you know, earlier when you mentioned the science and the magic, one reason I wanted to introduce magic, even though I felt like, oh no, this is getting too unwieldy. I don't know if I can incorporate this. But the reason that I actually thought in the end, oh, this makes sense, this is part of the book, was that it's very much a book about questioning that certainty, right? Questioning the confidence that some, you know, and I think most like not, you know, the foundational confidence of, you know, these nations and stuff, and of these people who think that they know what's best for other people, I guess.
Well, I like that how that ties into this idea of time being a limited resource, and actually the thing that you need to use it for is simply to experience it and to be with it. And there's a certain amount of needing to admit to yourself in the present your limitations and the necessity
Exactly.
of like just being. And I think both of the books are curious and open to those things by having characters who have to come to it in roundabout and sometimes very painful ways. Just going back to the gene editing, is that based on a technology that exists?
It's not the stuff that they did like in the 70s. No, that was sort of made up, but I think I talked with a scientist about making it, you know, sound believable. Someone the other day
Well, I was
said,
convinced. I was
yeah,
convinced.
someone the other day said that she read it like, you know, the moment in Jurassic Park when they're taking the DNA out of the mosquito or whatever, you know, like she's like, yeah, it seemed like it made sense. And I was like, okay, that was the goal. The goal was a sort of um therapy that sounded believable enough that that yeah, lay people would believe it, and then scientists would not like throw the book across the room. So I hope I accomplished that. Remains to be seen. But yeah, I
There's an
think
angry scientist behind you. Oh my God, with a
we can't actually see them if they're on this call. Please don't say anything. It's
lamp.
too late. It's actually too late. Um, yeah, I have lost my train of thought, but
Oh, it was immensely convincing to the extent that I was, you know, Googling gene therapy. Is it scary? Gene therapy
yeah,
would
yeah. I
happen to
think
me.
it's not that it's yeah. So it was impossible. You know, nothing like that happened then. It might have been possible, but now there are so many things that are possible, right? And I think the reason that I wanted to write this book was that it's all on the horizon. I think AI, for example, we just think about more because I think it's a little bit more human-sized in that we can interact with it, you know, on the computer. We can sort of think about how it's going to take our jobs. But with gene editing, it's pretty much here, you know, like it's on its way. It's very looming, um and we don't talk about it because it feels a little too daunting, right? Like I think a lot of lay people, including myself, you know, because we don't understand it, we feel as though we're not qualified to discuss it. But I think that we have to discuss it because this is literally deciding the future of what human beings are going to be, right? And what are we going to value going into the future? I hope it's values like diversity in who people are, right? And not trying to make everybody the same.
Yeah.
But I kind
Well,
of
it's
wonder about that.
this idea of like who people are. It's so interesting that this like gene editing is a way to manipulate. It appears to manipulate in the case of Nick, for example, who he is because people understand him as white.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so he experiences the world. Other people experience him as a white man, but Nick is not in fact white. He's a mixed race person, and like there's that strange sense of like, well, you've been manipulated. You know, the municipal architecture of your body has been built in such a way that you present to this world, this structure, who you are. But in fact, who you are as a person is something he is having to figure out day by day, which I found like so fascinating and troubling and interesting, and particularly because he's such a good perspective, because he does feel to me exactly like a young man. He's like 17, 18.
I think when we meet him, he's a teenager. He's around 15, 16, and then he's aging throughout his section. But yeah, he shares a lot of this, he appears one way, but then he feels a different way, right? And has been raised a different way. And the narrator of Ministry of Time also, sort of is like a little bit hiding in plain sight with Graham for quite a while, where she's not even sure how to explain mixed race.
Yeah, in a way that would be acceptable to a Victorian, or like to anyone from the past who thinks that all of these people who are pulled from the past understand themselves as British, but of course they are not being received as British because they seem so foreign,
Right.
because they have certain histories and certain habits and mores, and their sense of culture is so different that although they can, I suppose it's almost a book about passing, they can pass as British, but they are the wrong kind of British.
Yes.
Yeah, I find
that's so interesting too. Like, I feel like you do so much with language and the way that language is changing constantly. We talked about racial slurs, but also, that idea of what it means to be British is different in these different British people's minds. And there is no, like standard British person, right? Like there's no standard. I mean, what would that even, I don't even, what would it even?
It's well, this is one of the things that I found really interesting about my own limitations in writing the book, because obviously I write from the perspective of a mixed race person, but I also write from the perspective specifically of a person who was born and lives in London, but also as an English woman. And a lot of the book is as much about Englishness as it is about Britishness, because I think if you suggested to a Welsh person or a Scot or someone from Northern Ireland that there is a kind of united Britishness that makes sense to everyone, they would be enraged, like absolutely furious. And I like even the fragmentation within identities. You think you see something unified, but when you look up close, it's full of shards, basically shards that are constantly rubbing, and that friction is where the stories come from, I think, sparking out, which is obviously great for us.
Yeah, exactly.
Very handy that those terrible frictions exist so that we can write about them. Can I ask a question that is not really a question about the book itself, but as a person who has just published her first novel and is finding it very terrifying?
Yes.
You are on novel number 2. Does it become less terrifying? Does anything change?
Wow, I think we need to just talk a lot more after this, because there's a lot to say. It's just terrifying in a different way, or it's just very different. I think the sophomore novel, the second novel, is very it's really its own challenge, where the debut is like, can I even do this? Can I finish this? Will this be a book that anyone reads? Once you get past that point, then the second one is like, oh no, people know that I'm a writer.
That means you have to write, because they've put the identity on you. There is a narrative. There's a narrative that
Exactly.
you published a book, and therefore you must publish again.
That's something, we don't have time for, and I would love to talk to you more about, but the ways in which, we've written these stories that are about stories, and now there are stories that swirl about the stories themselves, right? Like the sort of like projection stories, like so much conversation, because as you've said, the reader is meeting the writer. There's so much perspective that's being brought to like the actual work itself, and readers co-create the books with the writers, I think. But as a result, it means that like there's so many versions of the book floating out there in each person's mind, and that feels at times it's mind-blowing, exciting, but it's also this feeling of like, what have I done?
What have I done? It's like one of those Escher
Yeah.
drawings, right, where there's all these different angles.
Yeah.
But which I do enjoy, but it's like sometimes it does feel like walking down an endless staircase that underneath your feet the staircase just keeps piling on and piling on. There is no bottom. That's a good thing. There's no bottom to the storytelling. That's wonderful. Good for us.
Did we want to answer Meredith, or I'm not sure who's asking questions?
Sorry, Rachel, and can you guys hear me?
Sorry,
Yes,
you can, yes.
I'm unable to turn my video on, but that's okay. I can just ask the questions in the background. Oh, here we go. All right, here I am. Hi. Thank you,
Hey.
guys. I could listen to you talk all day. I think you could all talk all day, but we do have to get to the audience Q&A. So thanks everybody for putting your questions in. This question is for both of you. Are there other areas or parts of history that you would like to write about?
Ooh. Do you have an answer that's faster than mine?
Ooh,
Have you started a new project?
I have, but I've it is partly set in the land of the dead, which is obviously, I mean, we will all visit it eventually, but people tend not to send reports back. So in terms of yeah, I guess that is a different area I'd like to explore. Um, given half the chance, I would simply spend all my time writing stories about all of human history, but I don't think even within the span of one life you can get around to that.
Mm. Yeah, my next thing, I can't really say, I just can't say anything about it yet, but it's set um roughly 10 years ago. So that's recent history.
Great. Thanks. Okay. Melody is asking for both of you, what are some words of wisdom that have had a positive impact on your life and that you find yourself often sharing with others?
Ooh, like for a writer,
Sure, for a writer. We'll
just
do
about life.
that.
The best writing advice I've ever been given, which I also always give, is only write the fun parts, which has been the best advice I've ever been given, because I do now only write what I conceive of as the fun parts, which doesn't mean like the silly parts or the unserious parts or the parts with jokes. It is the parts that are, for me, pleasurable to spend time with and expansive for the practice, which means that once they're down, then I start to find the space to build around them. In terms of life advice, a comic called Achewood, an online comic called Achewood, gave me the best advice I've ever read, which was, I wish in the past I'd done more stuff, because now I know that being in trouble is a fake idea. Can have that one for free.
Found, I know. I don't know. I guess writing advice is just to read a lot, because I think reading makes you a better writer. Maybe that's also life advice. I'm gonna cheat and put those both in one answer, because
I think it's life advice too.
yeah.
I think we could all stand to read more. Not people on this call, of course, present company excluded. Uh, okay. This one's not, this is a thought that somebody wants to pitch to, but I think it could be interesting. She said, I don't totally know how to phrase this as a question, but I would love to hear y'all's thoughts on data collection as violence in relation to the book's narratives, surveillance of the expats, DNA testing, etc.
A very, very good thought phrased as question.
Yeah.
Do you want to go first with this one?
I know. I mean, I just, yeah, violence is a good word for it. I think one that I feel is really true. It's just true. And I don't know how to, with all of this stuff, I just don't, I don't actually know how to like fight back, right? You know, I think I wrote this book in part because, and I feel like the Ministry of Time has so many resonances with this, but it's about like being a person living through history, wanting to change it, but not sure how you can actually do that as one single human being, right? And you can sort of lodge your protests and you can be in relationships with the people in your life, but like, yeah, how do you actually make, like, yeah, change the world to be more the way that you want it to be? And I think for me, it's partly writing books, right? Like writing a book, it does feel like a very small protest. It's not a huge thing, but it's something that I can do to say, hey, I'm not okay with this. This is not something that I approve of. And hopefully that like starts conversations and yeah, and I think like, you know, something comes of that.
I liked what you were saying earlier about the fact that you did not actually consent to have a lot of your data harvested. It's just the way that technology has been given to us. It takes from us as a kind of unspoken agreement, an implicit agreement that we are happy to be surveyed in this way. The same is slightly true of the expats who are monitored by the ministry. So this data about themselves is being funneled into the ministry, which is presented to them as a way of being looked after. They are being surveyed because they need to be looked after. When in fact quite a lot of this surveillance is feeding back as a way to manipulate and control who they should be or who they could be, which is a form of top-down violence, in fact, state-imposed and structural violence. I had another thought, but it has just got farted out my ear.
Yeah.
Todd, there was a few questions about the character of the bridge and her similarities in some ways to you yourself, and people are very curious to know sort of what is from your own experience in that character and where your experiences diverge.
So this is always a very interesting thing to answer, because a fun secret fact about the narrator of the novel, The Bridge, is that I actually took her from a different novel I was writing, because she just fit really well. And in that novel was supposed to be, quote unquote, the big British Cambodian novel, if such a thing could exist, which meant that a lot of the characters in it were British Cambodian, or were Cambodian, or were part of the diaspora, or had like various links to it. And I wonder if that had been the first book I'd published, which it would have been full of people who shared my admittedly not frequently run across identity, whether I would have been asked quite so much whether I am the narrator of the Ministry of Time. I think that it would be very disingenuous for me to say that I do not draw on family experience or personal experience. Of course, that it enriches and informs quite a lot of who the character is, but I do think that she is a distinct fictional character. So I was interested in certain thematic elements from her life, the life of a mixed race white passing person, the life of someone who is dealing with inherited trauma, the life of someone who comes from a marginalized identity in a government structure that wants these marginalized identities to be smoothed over. But the idea that it's autobiographical, sadly, I don't live the time traveling Victorian. I've tried.
Thank you. Let's see, what is the next question I wanted to go to? There's a lot. I guess one question that I have for both of you, both of you are, writing lots of different characters with lots of very distinct voices. So even just in the writing process, how do you keep track of those point of views and voices? How do you develop them? Is it ever confusing, or do you wish you had less people to deal with as you're going along?
Well, yeah, no, you go first. Go first.
These people are all my friends. They're my friends. I love hanging out with them. Well, this is it, because I think that the very first version of this book, because it was written for fun, it was written for friends, and it was just a game, there was just no pressure on me whatsoever to think about it as keeping perspectives clear. And I do wonder how it will be for a second book. Like, will I trip up? Will I trip up as I imagine a broader audience, as I imagine careful handling of the craft? I can't wait to find out how I fall over.
I don't think that's gonna no falling is gonna happen. I don't know, they are, as you were saying, they're so distinct, they're really distinct to me. Like, they feel like different people, and I'm also not any, I'm not any of the characters, and yet I have felt the same emotion as many of the characters, right? So it's almost just like putting, yeah, it's like, it's not quite channeling. Again, I'm coming back to this mystical thing. It's not channeling, but it does feel as though I'm sort of dropping into a different perspective. One of my writing teachers years ago, her name's Jill Cement. She has a book out called Consent that I'm very excited to read. That's a memoir actually about a scandalous relationship. Anyway, she used to tell me that every time somebody submitted a story, she would, and say there was some premise, like somebody's dog had been hit by a car or something, and then she would read the story, and then she would say, but is this how you would really feel? Like, is this how they would really feel? And she just like kept asking that, round after round after round in revision, like, is this how you would actually feel? Like, what does it mean to be this person who has gone through these things, who has gone through this, yeah, whatever these events are? And so I think about that all the time, like, how am I truly embodying, and really like almost like physically like embodying this person that I am pretending to be.
Great. A few questions for both of you. What are you reading right now, and what are your favorite novels?
Ooh. Well, I'm sorry to say that I've been in a group read of Ulysses for 8 months. And
Wow.
How far are you? What page are you on?
we're done. We finished it. We finished
Wow.
Ulysses. I have read Ulysses. I am that guy. Very, very exciting. So I'm planning to read something very short next. Very, very short indeed. I think it's probably going to be Thousand Cranes by Yasunari Kawabata. Very small novella. Can't wait.
Yeah, I'm sort of in the same, I didn't read Ulysses, but I feel like Book Tour was a Ulysses in a sense. It was just ringing out of my brain. So I'm trying to read just short, manageable things at the moment. But I'm reading The Buried Giant by Ishiguro, which I had never read before. And I know it's very divisive, which kind of excites me. So I'm excited to read it and think about what I think, and and read other perspectives too. But favorite novels of all time is so hard. I panic.
Yeah, do you like the way I just passed the question on to
I
you?
know. That's a good method, because I really wish, it's so hard. I don't know. Do you have an
I'm
answer?
sorry to the person who asked that question that you won't get your answer that you were looking for, but
I can tell you,
okay.
very recently I've read a novel that I love very much, if that helps. It was Beautyland by
Oh, yes.
So although it's not a favorite novel of all time, but if someone says to me, what would you recommend at the moment, apart from Real Americans by Rachel Khong, which I have also very recently finished, I would recommend Beautyland very, very heartily.
Yes, it's on my list. I'm excited for that one.
Great. I think I will just wrap it up with one last question. And it's a question that I actually, sometimes I find annoying when the question asker asks it. But I want to ask it to both of you, because I really, truly do feel like I would like to read more from your characters and sort of know what they're doing next. So do either of you have plans to write anything else in the worlds of these novels with the characters in the future?
I can tell you that we're doing a very, can I tell you this? I think I can.
We must treat doomed as sort of a cone of silence. So yes.
The heat dome and the cone of silence.
Our closest friends, yeah.
Which is, this is not confirmed yet, so I'm saying it as a kind of vague caveat, but my British publisher are planning to do a special Christmas edition, which is a very British thing, which will feature a short story set in the cottage that the expats go to for Christmas. It's a ghost story. I also have dozens of short stories like written around from the time of writing, but some of it contradicts what happened in ministry because of the edits it went through. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, never say never, I guess, but no.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's all the time we have for this evening. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank you, Rachel and Ka, and the whole team at SNS that was behind the scenes putting this all together. And thanks to all the bookstores. And have a great night, everybody. Thanks again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.